Hello everybody and welcome to the live stream. Hi John.
Hello.
Hi Jim.
Hey, how you doing? What's up?
Oh, not much, not much. So everybody, welcome to the Kursk live stream. As you can see, I'm joined by John and our buddy Jim, our historical editor.
You are outnumbered by historical minds this evening.
I'm mildly historical.
You're getting there. You're getting there.
You know, still sewing up the anorak.
Oh man, no! It's for me. It's on tight. Drawstrings are pulled. I look like Kenny from South Park at this point.
Justin, one of your pictures. I'm sorry, one of your comments in the article thread we'll be getting to. You're definitely learning. You're slowly getting there.
Oh crap! I'm nervous.
Shall I just pop the bubble right now and say that I had to proofread it?
Oh no!
No! Hang on. When we're not live, I can get stuff checked so I don't look stupid.
Now, to be fair, I didn't change. I didn't say any of your questions were bad. I just said you just need to change your grammar in English.
Yeah, my English is really crappy.
So, for this evening,
yes,
we're going to be chatting about the article series that's going out.
Yep.
I will be monitoring the chat, so if nobody gets any shout-outs, you know why.
Yeah, chat is monitored from YouTube and Twitch. Nowhere else at the moment, unfortunately. Anybody in?
Well, we have Tuffy in at the minute, and Markod.
Let me have a look here.
Yeah. Oh, you can bring the chat up now.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Amanda's in too. Sweet.
What?
Sweet.
I'm the technology guy. I'm not the historical guy. I'm the technology guy.
Yeah, clearly. Because that works.
Justin is behind the camera talent, right?
Ignore the small man behind the curtain. Ignore the small man behind the curtain.
You have a voice for TV and a face for radio.
Right, so, shall we begin?
Yeah, where are we going to start?
Well, as with most things, we begin at the beginning. Jim, you've written up a very quick intro for everybody to actually bring them very quickly up to speed on what you're doing with Kursk, yeah?
Super fast overview for those who may not be familiar. Like the guys were saying, we're running a 5-part article series on the Battle of Kursk. Took place in July and August of 1943 on the Eastern Front. This is between the armies of the Germans and the Soviets in World War II. And we're running the series now to mark the 75th anniversary of this battle. Actually started on July 5th. Yesterday was the 75th anniversary of Prokhorovka itself. Now is definitely the time to run this article series. By any realistic or quantitative or fact-driven kind of unbiased measure here, this is the largest battle that there's ever been. We went through some of the numbers before, so I'm not going to bore everybody again, but we're talking about 3 times the size of Normandy, 2 times the size of battles like Berlin and Stalingrad, 12 times Alamein, 20 times Waterloo, and 40 times the size of Operation Market Garden. So this is definitely a huge, huge battle, especially when you consider the Soviet phases of the battle that a lot of Western histories kind of forget about, which we really shouldn't do. So it's a 5-part article series. It's sketching in some of the history. The history is just too big to even really try on this. I mean, I've got books stacked up on either side of me here. There's literally thousands of books written on this. I'm not going to cover everything in a 5-part article series on Beasts of War, much as I would love to try. We just wanted to give some people some background, some inspiration, not only for wargaming the Battle of Kursk, but also to wargaming on the Eastern Front in general. If you want to be a World War II gamer, really, you got to go to the Eastern Front at least once in a while. This is where 85% of World War II takes place. You kind of have to go to the Eastern Front at least once in a while.
Yeah, definitely. Right, so that's the very raw, bare bones basics of it.
Yeah.
Now, let's quickly jump along, because Jim, you've been picking out some questions from people during the article that you actually wanted to sit down and actually chat with us about, and chat with John about, most importantly. Because he's the other historical guy here.
Well, before we do that, I want to jump onto the chat real quick because there's a couple of people making really good points here. Amanda, what about historical technology? Justin, you any good with that?
Yeah. You know, I mean, like historical technology, generally, if you need to make it work, you just need a bigger wrench.
Or a hammer.
Yeah, that works too.
But the one I really wanted to get to is Markod here is the scale of Eastern Front is hard to grasp for a lot of people in general, especially with the limited amount of original source material in English.
Yes.
That is a key point that was in my head just before that comment came up.
Yeah.
Where it's incredibly hard for Western researchers and historians to find a lot of good detailed information on what happened on the Eastern Front, because most of it's written in Russian.
Not to mention the actual ability to imagine war on the scale of Kursk is damn near impossible.
It is. It is almost like it's as close to 40k as you can get in reality. You know, that's how big the whole Eastern Front was.
Well, I mean, like for me, the last couple of years I've been doing more traveling, and actually getting to realize just the scale of some countries.
Yeah.
It kind of throws you for a loop. I mean, like, the first time I flew into America, we got halfway through our flight.
Yeah.
Pilot comes over the intercom, goes, hello, ladies and gentlemen, we are halfway through our flight. We are just entering American airspace. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
You're halfway through the flight, and already the Atlantic Ocean is far behind you, and you're just coming into America.
Yeah, but you still have halfway to go to actually land. And
it's it's a good point that Markod's making, because you even find, see, when the video game World of Tanks came out, there's so much stuff that's coming out, and a lot of people say the Russian bias of video games, but it's mostly because a lot of those interesting Russian vehicles the Western world didn't know about because nobody had written about them in English.
Yeah.
Like the post-war tank T-44, nobody knew that thing existed until someone in Russia turned around and said, oh, by the way, this thing's existing, and there's two of them in Russia. Like, there's two of them still in existence, and everyone was like, what the heck is this?
That's kind of like the evolutionary link between the later marks of the T-34 and the first T-54s.
Exactly, yeah. So you have, when stuff starts getting translated from their natives into English for the Western populations to digest, you start to find all this really odd stuff coming out of the woodwork, even some of the German stuff. Because if it's not been researched to hell, which a lot of it now is being researched to hell because it has become available in English, a lot of people don't know about it.
Well, your Joe average on the street, what they know of World War II is what they're seeing from Hollywood, from movies.
Yeah.
So they'll know about the big cats, they'll know about the Shermans, they'll know about the Firefly.
And it's... I'm going to have a little tangent.
Okay.
That's a failure of people that teach history. That is a failure of people that are in the educational world that have been told, make a history lesson about World War II, and all they do is they basically go on the bare bones basic documentary information that you can get off Discovery Channel, which 80% of the time isn't really correct and is mostly done because it's cool.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of documentaries about tanks.
Cinematography all the way.
Yeah, a lot of documentaries about tanks and battles, as we will probably discuss very soon here.
Yeah.
They just focus on the one cool thing. Like at Kursk, they focus on Prokhorovka.
Yeah, the big battle.
With German tanks, it's the big cats.
Yeah.
With the Allies, it's the Sherman and how rubbish it is, which is being revised at the minute.
Yep.
In historical terms. Anyway, Jim, I will let you get
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's all you, buddy.
I'm just looking at some of the questions here in the thread here. I'll get to in just a second. To talk about what you were addressing a second ago, where we're talking about the history of the history, so to speak.
Yeah.
Who wrote the history of the Eastern Front? When was it written? The Eastern Front, there's a lot of English material for it. The problem is, for the first 40 years or so after World War II, there was this little thing called the Cold War. And nobody really wanted to hear anything about what the Russians had to say about anything. Nobody wanted to admit that they won 85% of World War II. Almost everything else that took place in World War II was effectively a sideshow. And what little there was published on the Eastern Front was mostly British historians, at least the first generation of histories, British historians talking about what was happening from the German perspective. A lot of these German officers fell into British captivity, American captivity after the war. They wrote all these books. We got Panzer Battles by Mellenthin, Panzer Commander by Hans von Luck. We've got Panzer Leader by Heinz Guderian. Manstein wrote a book. Hoth wrote all these guys sat down and wrote a bunch of books, sometimes in prison, but they all sat down and wrote a bunch of books. And these are great materials. The problem is they're only reading from the German perspective. So from the Soviet perspective, we really have nothing, or had nothing.
Yeah.
Then we have sort of a renaissance, so to speak, when Yeltsin comes to power, Gorbachev comes into power, the Soviet Union collapses. There's this brief window in the 90s and early 2000s where the Soviet archives are open and the Soviet press is open enough, or I should say the Russian press is open enough to where everything that is found from the Soviet perspective, isn't just heaping piles of international socialist propaganda. I mean, I don't want to get too political here, but the average Russian source on the Eastern Front, man, you have to come at it with a machete and a flamethrower to kind of carve your way through the absolute piles of propaganda, and the West would never help us, and fascist hordes, and everyone was a mass murderer, and it was horrible. There are some great websites I can point people to. Armchair General, the RKKA project, immense pile of Soviet actual maps, sometimes with the eraser marks still on the maps. You can see where guys were actually driving these battles. Some guy, an American university professor, found a bunch of these maps, scanned them all, uploaded them. They're a huge resource. Unfortunately, this is where we enter the third phase of Russian history of the Eastern Front. You'll see the last post this guy made was like in 2009. With some of the changes that have taken place in the Russian government in more recent years, a lot of these archives have snapped shut again, and we're back into the nobody knows what's going on from the Soviet perspective. We do have some historians. On your side of the water, we have Richard Overy. He's probably the best British historian over there as far as looking at things from the Soviet perspective. In the early 90s, he wrote a book called Blood Upon the Snow. I mean, like a 10-part documentary series about it. He's more socio-political than strict military, but he's still a very valuable resource. And over here in America, we have David Glantz, who is the absolute pinnacle as far as objective, looking at things very, very detailed, and from a certain point from the Soviet perspective. We've got some people in the chat mentioning some of the television series that have been produced by the Russians, actually about the Great Patriotic War, as they call it. The Soviet Storm, somebody mentioned, that's definitely a good point. An interesting thing to do about the Soviet Storm, to illustrate the point I'm just making, is to watch it in YouTube. There's a version of Russian with English subtitles, and there's a version where I think the BBC bought the rights to it, and they just did like a voiceover in English. And if you watch them side by side, some of those translations don't come across. There's definitely a slant to it, and it just kind of highlights what we're talking about, the how different nations, even today, want to look at the Great Patriotic War.
Well, I mean, like, can you have a truly objective view on history? Because the history that you'll have grown up with has always been written by the victor. So it'll always be written to actually make your home nation seem to be shown in the best light.
To weigh in on that straight away, as I've been mentioning a couple of times now, there's been a big revisionist movement, which particularly focuses on, did we really get what we've said right? The finest example is the Sherman that I can bring up. A lot of people said the Sherman was a death trap, it burned too easily.
The whole Tommy Cookers thing. Yeah,
the whole Tommy Cooker thing. And recently there was a lot of revisionists, particularly sort of sparked by World of Tanks. You have the Chieftain and the Challenger. They're two big military guys that go around and look around the vehicles and stuff. And the Chieftain, in particular, Nick Moran, I think if I've got his name right, he's done a big, almost, he calls it a crusade to revise the history of the Sherman and the history of various military vehicles. And he's actually come across a load of statistics that show at the end of the war the death rates of tank crew compared to infantry. And it's actually, I think, for all the tanks they took to Europe, they say that for every tank blown up, for every Sherman knocked out, completely knocked out, the death rate was 0.8 or 0.5.
Right.
So it's like maybe every 2 or 3 tanks, one guy technically died.
All right.
So the statistics have started to go really odd with that. Like, they're saying that the Sherman was rubbish, but the revisionists are saying, actually, it was a pretty good tank, except in these little circumstances. And it's those little circumstances that everybody reported on. So when a Tiger killed a Sherman, oh my God, Shermans are rubbish. They catch fire so easily. Actually, no, they don't. But tanks tend to burn.
It builds into the myth that I think David Fletcher corrected in one of his shows, where it was like, the Sherman always caught fire and brewed up because it was it was fueled by gasoline, while the German tanks were armed with diesel. What World War II are you talking about? You know, German tanks were fueled almost entirely by gasoline. Ask the Russians, who tried to use those mine dogs that you see in early Barbarossa, where they would actually strap explosives to some poor dog and train it to eat under a Soviet tank. And then when the German tanks showed up, they'd set these guys loose and they would blow up. The idea was that they would blow up under the German tanks.
Yeah.
Problem is, German tanks are all run on gasoline or petrol like everybody else.
Yep.
And a petrol engine smells and sounds different than a diesel engine.
Yep.
And dogs go mostly by sound and smell, so these dogs would run under Soviet tanks instead.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the idea that, to Justin's point earlier, there's a very famous expression, infamous expression: history is written by the victors.
Mm.
History is written by the victors. History is rewritten by the losers.
Mm.
And you see this in the Eastern Front for sure, where 90% of the first generation of Eastern Front military history is written from the German perspective, because it's all British historians talking to German officers who were there.
Yeah.
And then the Americans, who don't really care about history, I'm sorry to say, are culturally, America's terrible with history.
Yeah.
If it happened before I was born, I don't care about it. That's the general. There's some exceptions, but the Americans were sitting down with these German officers, talking about their experiences on the Eastern Front. This is especially Mellenthin. Okay, you fought large Soviet tank forces before. How did you beat them? Because we're going to fight them again now in Germany. This is 60s, 70s, 80s, Team Yankee, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. To the point where Schwarzkopf, during Gulf War I, famously had a copy of Mellenthin's Panzer Battles sitting on his desk over there in Saudi Arabia during Operation Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. You guys remember the Germans lost that war, right? I mean, yeah. You're asking Mellenthin, how did you beat these guys? Mellenthin's like, mein General, we didn't beat them. They won. These are the things you're up against, and I mean, I can give you some pointers about how the Russians like to fight, but even that's hopelessly out of date at this point. It wasn't until these late 80s, early 90s, early 2000s that we start seeing the Eastern Front written pretty much from the victor's perspective. And even then, there's a lot of propaganda piled on it, which makes it almost useless as a historical reference.
Yeah, very fair point.
Good couple of things coming in the chat from Big Dave here.
Yeah, well,
big issue was the ammunition blowing up. Later models of Shermans tried to fix that. They kind of did.
Mm-hmm.
This is the wet storage, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, the introduction of water jackets in the later model Shermans, and I think they retrofitted a few earlier models with them as well towards the end of the war.
Yeah.
Marcotte also makes a good point. Ammo fire was the big cause of tank losses, total tank losses during World War II. Mm. That is correct, but there's also a caveat to that, which I was explaining to you a couple of weeks ago. Actually, we were watching the.
I think I may have glazed over it.
Yeah, you might have. We were watching the footage of the tank hunt in Cologne, the Panther hunt with the Pershing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There's a beautiful. I can't remember who did it. They slowed and stabilized the footage so you could see the tank a lot more clearly.
Yeah, they created like a larger black screen and actually moved it about within it.
Just stabilized it all really nicely, and you see the 3 shots go into this Panther, and you think, well, after the second shot, that tank's done.
Yeah.
But it's the third shot, and this is the key one. The third shot sets it on fire.
Yeah.
And it was when that gunner was interviewed, because he actually put a book out.
Yeah.
In his book and in an interview, he said, well, standard procedure for us was to fire at a tank until it burned.
Yeah.
Because if it didn't burn, you could recover it, repair it, and send it back out.
Yeah.
That's why you see a lot of footage of knocked out tanks in the Second World War. They have been on fire for hours or days or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they kept firing at them until they guaranteed that thing was on fire.
Yeah.
So you just couldn't fix it.
Yeah, so that's more of a tactical thing than the actual thing being crappy or just being able to burn easy.
Because you're not at... Let's go through a really arbitrary example out here. You're firing at something that's 600 meters away.
Right.
And you don't see it on fire. Did you knock it out? That's the big question. Did you knock that tank out? I've hit it twice, but I don't see any smoke coming out of it.
Yeah.
Did my shells
Especially the way a knocked out tank normally looks. Yeah. You see a hole this big in one side of the turret and a hole this big in the other side of the turret.
Yeah.
You're not going to see that from 600 meters away.
No.
Not at all.
So the idea was to set the thing on fire so you knew that tank is now out of action. I don't have to worry about that one.
So you have an easy visual recognition to actually say, that's done, moving on.
Yeah. That's why a lot of tank losses you see the tank burned out, because that's what they were doing. Just keep shooting at it until it's on fire.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. Makes perfect tactical sense.
We have a question or a comment from Marquad. Marquad, I hope I'm saying that right. Talking about commanding the Red Army Sherman tanks. The Shermans were huge. Not so much in Kursk. We didn't have them. The Soviets didn't have them in Kursk. There were some Lees at Kursk. I didn't get a chance to get to them in the article series. They fought against some of Army Detachment Kemp's divisions further in the southeast. But by the end of the war, you have enormous numbers you have entire Guards tank corps. The 5th Guards Tank Corps, I believe, that went into Vienna in April of '45 is completely outfitted with Shermans. So Shermans are definitely a big thing. I do have a book over here, T-34 in Action, written entirely by interviews or from interviews from Soviet tank veterans. And they're talking about, I mean, we talk about how the Sherman was so terrible. These guys are used to the T-34. And there are some comments in here that kind of compare unfavorably the T-34 to the Sherman. And there's definitely a case to be made for that. But these T-34 veterans, the first time they saw the inside of a Sherman, the exact quote was, "I thought I had just checked into a hotel. This thing is gorgeous, like he's curled me go to sleep in here." This is the inside of a tank. But Soviet tanks are, not very heavy on the crew accommodations, so to speak.
They are cozy.
They're snug.
Yeah, they're snug.
The gunnery site is literally a lead pipe that you have to stick your eye on while the tank's bounced around at 30 miles an hour.
Yep.
Good luck not blinding yourself on that.
And the poor loader is stood on the ammunition bins. There's ready racks in the side of the hull, but your floor, the turret floor, is the ammo bins for the main gun.
With a grand total of, at least in the original T-34 A, Bs, and Cs, and this flies out the window later with the T-34-85, 9 rounds to start with.
What?
That's it. After 9 rounds. After that, you have to start taking up pieces, like John was just saying, you have to take up pieces of the floor and actually load the gun with shells out of the shells that are stored underneath the floor of the turret.
Yeah.
Oh, one more thing. That loader that John was talking about, that's also the tank's commander.
Yeah.
Because this is the old 2-man turret when there's only a gunner and a commander in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of drawbacks. Once the T-34-85 comes out, that's a 3-man turret, and the 85mm gun, you've got some major improvements. And this is the tank that you see fight. I think Angola was using the T-34-85 in combat as late as the late 1990s. You see them used in the Egyptians and the Syrians, where, by the way, the people talk about the Sherman. The Sherman was still fighting. The high-powered Israeli the Israeli upgrades, the Super Shermans, were knocking out T-62s and T-55s as late as October 1973.
Yep.
So, terrible or not terrible, these tanks were still, kicking ass well into the Cold War, well into the early 1970s.
Yeah, you find that a lot of the World War II designs, they stayed viable for certain countries for a long time because the country that was opposing them didn't have it. Or they had something of a similar generation to it.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, like, what was done with all of those vehicles after the war was over? I'm guessing they were sold to other countries.
Everybody, yeah. My dad's recent acquisition, the 6-pounder, that came out of Israel.
Really?
It was... It had 2 information plates on it. I'm getting nerdy again. I do apologize. We might get back on topic in the next hour.
It's a live stream. We have no topic.
Good point. It had 2 information plates, or 2 data plates on it.
Yeah.
So it had a casting mark underneath the gun mount that said it was a 1942 weapon, but it had another stamp on it behind the gun shield that said 1947, which I found kind of curious because I was like, well, why does it have two different dates on it? And then I remembered that our Sherman, when we had it, was after the war when it was deemed obsolete and they couldn't sell it to anyone.
Yeah.
It was fully reconditioned,
right,
brand spanking new, made factory new again, and then driven out onto a firing range. And I was like, hang on a minute. So after the war, the British had this big labour force that they'd turned to war production.
Yeah.
Now these guys need to slowly filter out of war production and do something else. So you have this big labour force sat there with all this stuff that's just come back from Europe and is now obsolete to Britain, but it's not obsolete to other countries, particularly fledgling Israel. So what they did
Israel's tank force, at least the Shermans, were third hand. The Americans fought World War World War II. They wanted to get the Free French back on their feet. The Free French obviously had no tanks, so they gave them these piles and piles of Shermans. After the war, the French immediately start to develop the AMX-13, ironically with German guns at first, the 75mm that was on the Panther. And then they said, you know what? We got all these Shermans laying around. The Americans at this point were not really allies with Israel, not to get too much into the politics of it. Eisenhower and Truman were staying a big arm's length from that mess. They saw the mess coming on the road there. But the French were the French and the British. This is Operation Musketeer, the 1956 war in the Sinai Desert when Nasser tries to nationalize the Suez Canal. Blah 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 blah. The point is, the French are much more heavily invested in early Israeli history and helping them out, and so that's what happened to all those Shermans. Most of those Shermans that wound up fighting hard battles through the 1956 war, the 67 war, and even into the 73 war. Some reserve battalions were as late as Operation Peace for Galilee, 1982. I don't know if any of them actually got into combat, but the IDF did have them.
Wow.
Or old French, Free French, I should say, World War II stock that they in turn got from the Americans.
That's incredible to just see the.
And speaking of Marcotte again is mentioning. I do have a force of. You probably can't see this on the camera, but I have my Sherman 15 millimeters. I have like 6 of them in Soviet markings that I use for 5th Guards Tank Corps for late war into Poland, southern Poland, Galicia, into Austria at the end of the war. I wound up buying like 22 Shermans from another community member, Silver Fox 8, at the Desert War boot camp that I was at. And these are from the old open fire starter kits. And I'm going home with like 22 Shermans on the sprue. And these kits have a bit of a reputation, but I was able to get a pretty good result out of them. They did need a little bit of love, though.
They're all M4A4s as well, I'm happy to know.
So I got home and I'm like, I don't need another battalion of American tanks. So most of like half of them I made up as Americans. I made up like 6 of them as British for El Alamein battles, and then another 6 of them as Soviets. So yeah, Soviet Shermans, I know we keep coming back to this, but Soviet Shermans are definitely a force to be reckoned with, especially mid-war and late war.
Yeah,
I see.
Well, you find a lot of the stuff that was exported over to Russia was maybe not. It's really hard to say because I love T-34. Some of our stuff was probably definitely more user friendly than the home-brewed Russian stuff.
Yeah. Well, don't forget what the Russians were designing. They were designing it so that someone who worked on a farm could jump into that vehicle and fight from it.
Which was kind of the same philosophy that the Americans had with the Sherman and stuff like that. You should be able to get into this thing as a driver, and if you've ever driven an agricultural tractor or a bulldozer, you know what you're driving. You know it's there, and you know how to work it. It's all the same thing. You find with Russia, the tank philosophy for Russia was really interesting because it was, we've built this with a lifespan built into it.
Yeah.
So we know we're building them on the cheap because we only expect them to last. I think the T-34 was maybe a couple of months.
What?
I think they only wanted they wanted 8 weeks of combat out of it. And then after that, if it kept working after that was a bonus.
Okay, that is some serious undershooting. You know, seeing some of the stuff that you see with like T-34s and stuff getting dragged out of bogs. Okay, let's clean out the engine, let's put some fuel in it, some oil in it, off we go.
You find that simplicity lasts longer than technology.
Yeah, of course.
If you build a diesel engine, if you keep that thing slathered in oil, it will run forever.
Yeah.
As long as you don't do anything stupid with it. Like stick it in a tank and rev the crap out of it. But a diesel engine should last you forever.
Yeah.
Or shoot some holes in it with 75s or 88s.
Or shoot holes in it. Shoot holes is another thing.
That's definitely a stupid thing.
Diesel engines tend not to react well to that.
No. I mean, like, you hit it to make it work.
We were talking about before, as far as the 8 weeks go, Soviet tank losses, especially in 41 to 43, absolutely stagger the imagination. And for someone who's really into the hardcore historical research, I've got some really good references that list every Soviet tank regiment, tank battalion down to, and you find some tank battalions and you're like, was formed, destroyed, reformed, destroyed, reformed, destroyed, reformed. It goes through like 5 iterations. And it makes actually sometimes research a little difficult. Like I'm trying to put together the exact, maybe we'll get to this a little later in the stream, I'm trying to put together the exact, no bull, completely myth busted, no shortcuts, Panzerblitz scenario for the Prokhorovka battle, the entire Prokhorovka battle. I'm trying to find what some of these regiments and battalions all were, all the way down to the Churchills who were there. We'll get to that in a second.
Yep.
And you're like, oh my God, I can't figure out, okay, it's the 13th Guards tank, whatever. Which one was that? Because this thing got formed and destroyed and formed and destroyed and formed and destroyed 4 times over. On its third generation, it was attached to this brigade. On the fifth generation, it was attached to this regiment. On the third generation, trying to actually do the research on these things. And the Soviets are trying to rebuild their army on the fly, under fire, several times over. And I mean, they did pull it off, but obviously they paid one hell of a price doing it.
Yeah. Now that would actually be a very difficult thing to do, actually, because you then have to figure out, okay, when was it formed, what did it have, when was it destroyed, who was it attached to while that time of its iteration was active.
You have to get very granular with it in research. It's the only similar thing I have to that is
the PDF I have is 912 pages. And that's just tank forces. So I mean, John is absolutely right. You have to get granular to the nth degree. Absolutely.
So the Uber ran Iraq then?
Yeah, it's a bit easier with Western Front stuff because generally the people making the records were the people that never got shot.
Yeah.
So when a division or a regiment was reformed, there was that little cluster of people that knew what the regiment and division was before it got destroyed.
Yeah.
That just went, okay, and now we've stood back up again with this many men.
Yeah.
I think it was it 1st Infantry Division, James, on the Western Front. It was re-stood 7 times.
What?
Yeah, it's 700% casualties.
How do you have 700% casualties?
Well, here's how it happens. You have a unit that gets. Are you guys still there?
Yeah, we're here.
Yep.
Oh, okay. You have units that. I don't know if the entire 1st Infantry Division is going to have taken those kind of losses. If any American infantry division has, it would be the 1st.
Yep.
They were in at Operation Torch, and they were there on VE Day, and they never took a day off. I mean, they were there the whole way. They're one of the very few American divisions that was in almost every theater. I think some of the airborne divisions were also in every theater. When I say every theater, I mean North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France going into Europe. I don't know if the 1st ever got into Italy, but they were definitely in Sicily. They took some pretty horrific losses. They were the guys that got the crap shot out of them. We talked about this in a previous article series. This was the Americans in Tunisia series. That's almost all 1st U.S. Armored and 1st U.S. Infantry divisions. The big Patton tank battle that takes place near the beginning of the movie Patton, where he finally wins a battle and he defeats Rommel, even though Rommel's not there, and blah, blah, blah. That's U.S. 1st Infantry Division. Gotcha. Some U.S. infantry divisions could have taken some horrendous losses. I would definitely say that maybe some units within 1st Infantry Division have taken some incredible, several 100% casualties. You have the the infamous story. In fact, this is 1st Infantry Division. A Company, 116th, or maybe it's the 16th Regimental Combat Team at Omaha Beach, 95% casualties at Omaha Beach in the first 30 seconds of the battle. The classic Saving Private Ryan scene where the ramp goes down and the German MG-42s just kill everybody in the boat. That's Alpha Company. They're all from a certain town in southern Pennsylvania. This might be where Steven Spielberg got the idea to make Captain Miller from southern Pennsylvania. Yeah, and so how you get those multiples of 100% is you have 100 men in your company. I'm really rounding off here. They take 90% casualties. You pull them off the line. You give them 90 more men. They're back up to 100%. You send them to combat again. They take another 70%, another 70 dead or wounded. And now you've got 90 plus 70. You've got 160 dead out of a standing order battle of 100. Gotcha. You've got 160% casualties.
Gotcha.
It does happen. Especially, it depends on the army. Some armies may get, and the armies will change their rules throughout the wars. America's army has definitely changed its ideas on this practice a few times. Some units or some armies will put a unit in the field and they'll fight and they'll fight and they'll fight until they're all beat up. They'll pull it off. They'll disband the unit. They'll send the survivors to various training schools to pass on their experience, and that's that. Some units, like the Germans, for example, will reform the unit and send it back into combat. And then they'll reform the unit and send it back into combat. These units never die. You have the 16th Panzer Division that fought all through northern Italy. Weren't those guys annihilated at Stalingrad? Not a single one of those poor guys ever made it home. They don't care. They just make up a new division, slap the same name on it. Technically, it's the same division.
Gotcha.
So this is where you get some of it's difficult. The British are also very, very problematic on this.
Yeah.
I've made some major mistakes in wargame design, trying to figure out what British units were where and how they were reformed or whatever. I won't bore everyone with the details, but the way the British unit will, like, fourth a battalion of the whatever Lancasters, they'll take a certain amount of losses, they'll pull them back, they'll bolt them with another regiment, and now it's the 4/7th of whatever, Lincolnshire regiment, they send them back into combat. I'm looking at this map, I'm trying to figure out how many forces to put in their force in Panzerleader. I see 2 regiments, 4th and the 7th. I run the battle, and the Germans are getting creamed. I'm like, how did that happen? Did I do something wrong with my scenario design? And historically, the Germans maybe came out even or even won. How is it the British keep winning this battle? There's no way the Germans can win. It's not the entire 4th and the 7th. It's the leftovers of the 4th and the leftovers of the 7th bolted together. They don't give it a new name. They let the unit keep both names because they're very confusing. And it can actually, long story short, probably too late for that. Historical research, when you really want to get into the granular details of what units you want to put on the table, can get pretty challenging at times.
Okay. All right. Well, shall we get back to Kursk?
Yeah, I think we should go back east for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as James said earlier, if you're going to be a historical gamer, eventually you have to go east once in a while. So,
all right. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
James. You've picked out a. Okay, I'm going to say this now. If you hear banging at home, it's not a battlefield raging outside. We have builders in the office this evening. They've been trying to keep quiet all day, but it's the evening. They probably thought we weren't going to be here. So if you hear booms, bangs, and other stuff, don't worry. It's just builders.
Think of it as atmospherics.
Yes. Yes. Okay, Jim, you had picked out some questions and some comments that you wanted to go into a little bit more detail here with John and myself. Would you like to start running through them?
Sure. So I probably can't get through all of these in the amount of time we have, but let's see here. To kind of take things off of the tactical battlefield for just a second, Jenny was asking about how the Soviet High Command at Stavka got such detailed plans, or got such detailed information on the German plans going into Operation Citadel. Operation Citadel, we probably skipped this. Operation Citadel is the actual German code name for their attack against Kursk. Kursk was basically a gigantic salient, which if you take Northern Ireland off the map, turn it on its side, and put it down in the middle of southern Russia, that's almost the exact shape and size of the Kursk salient. Kursk salient is really just a large bulge in a line. The Germans wanted to attack it from north and south, kind of cut it off and destroy it. All kinds of details, we won't get into all that, but the Soviets had like a carbon copy of this plan almost on their tables, and he was wondering how that happened. Well, let's see. The Soviet High Command were some of the most well-informed people in the history of warfare, especially when it comes to Kursk. There's something called the Lucy Spy Ring. There's a couple German generals that we could call out, whatever. These are very, very strong anti-Nazi German generals in the OKW. That's the Oberkommando des Wehrmacht. They're on the communication staff. These are the big guys in Berlin that Hitler's always yelling at in Downfall or whatever. Well, after Hitler throws his pencils at the map, they walk out of the room and they copy down everything that was just said, or they take a copy of the Enigma communiques and they send a copy to this guy named Rossler in Switzerland. And Switzerland hands it off. This guy Rossler, he's actually Lucy in Lucy Spy Ring. He sends it over to a guy in I can't remember his name off the top of my head, a Hungarian expatriate. And he forwards it over to the Russian High Command, Russian intelligence. That's GRU. So the British also had great intelligence. The British had broken the Enigma code with the bronze goddesses. Some people consider these the world's first true computers. They probably have the processing power of nothing, but they were the size of a warehouse. They were absolutely huge. I'm sorry, did somebody want to say something there?
No. Just a little aside.
And then the Soviets had a spy within Ultra, because the British and the Soviets did not trust each other during that war, obviously. So even though Ultra, I should say, MI6 is sending over all their information to the Soviets don't trust it all the time. That's okay. They have a guy, his name is John Cairncross. By the way, big thanks to Big Dave for calling out that name in the comments. I could not think of that guy's name. John Cairncross is the guy who's actually, I'm not sure what his political affiliations or motivations were, but he would no matter, because whatever the British sent over to the Soviets was always edited a little bit. Let's make sure we kind of prompt the Soviets into doing what's best for our interests. Oh, Turkey might come into the war. Let's not tell them that, because we want to make sure that we run the table in the Mediterranean, blah, blah, blah. Karen Cross made sure that the Soviets got everything that Ultra produced. And also, the target is just blatantly obvious. It's this huge bulge in the line. The Germans have invented what they call the Kesselschlacht. It's the cauldron battle. They did it 19 times in 1941. They've won some of the largest victories in the history of warfare with this tactic, and here they have a golden opportunity. They literally can't resist. The Soviets take one look at the map, and they're like, you know what? They're going to hit us there. They're going to come in from the north. They're going to come in from the south. They're going to try and meet at Kursk. Here's the plan. Oh, look, we have a copy of this document that proves it. We have a copy of this document that proves it. We have a copy of this document that proves it. It's now been triple validated. Totally waiting and ready for it. To the point where minutes before the main German artillery bombardment started, the Soviets dropped their own preemptive artillery barrage on all the German artillery positions. How much damage it did is kind of up for debate, but that wasn't the point. The point was they telegraphed to every German soldier in Army Group Center and North, we know you're coming. We know you're coming. We are so ready for you. We know to the minute your artillery timetables, bring it. Yeah, just come on in. We are this, and it spooked the hell out of the Germans going in there.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. You know, if you're standing there in the artillery pits, ready to go, and 3, 2, what the hell's that whistling?
Yeah,
that's outgoing. That's incoming.
You find a lot of times that artillery does great things for morale. It does incredibly minus things for morale as well. But when you're the person sending it and not receiving it, you feel great, and the person receiving it is not having a terribly good day. Because as your guy from as the chieftain says, when you're being shot at, it's a significant emotional event. You're not feeling so good when fire is coming at you. But you feel a lot better when fire is going the other way.
What was the saying? I trot it out once in a while. Whenever you have a sniper rifle, that's very much a directed message. Whenever it's something high explosive, that's more of a to whom it may concern.
There you go.
When it's artillery, it's to whom it may concern.
There's a couple great lines from movies. There's I think one of the best American war movies ever made, The Thin Red Line, where Nick Nolte is playing this hard as nails, very callous with the lives of his men, lieutenant colonel, trying to do this offensive on Guadalcanal up this hill against his Japanese bunker. And he's got 2 batteries of 105s, and he's shelling this bunker. And the captain who has to lead this infantry attack, he's got him on the sound power radio. And he's like, do we have any kind of support going into this? He's like, don't worry about it. I got some support. He's like, what kind of support do we have? 2 batteries of 105s. That's not going to do anything against that position. So he's like, oh, I know. But it bucks the men up. It makes them think the Japanese are catching hell. And it doesn't do anything to them, and the Americans get slaughtered going up that hill. And then in it's a much cheesier movie, but in Platoon Leader, this old Cannon film about the Vietnam War. They're talking about bullets and rifle bullets and what they're doing. He's like, you know what? Because the American platoon leader in that movie he just had a huge battle. He's about ready to fall apart. He's questioning, what are we doing here? Like all the usual Vietnam questions. And the staff NCO, like the platoon sergeant in charge, he's like, don't worry about it, sir. We're in the idea business. It's like, what do you mean the idea business? He's like, we try to sell people ideas. This is the Cold War. This is a war about politics. He's like, you got to put an idea in their head. And if you can't put an idea in their head, and he holds up the 7.62 millimeter full metal jacket, you put one of these in their body. And they're not going to sell an idea to that guy, but it's going to make what we're selling a whole lot more appealing to the guy next to him.
Okay.
It's harsh, but it works. So, do we want to move on to another comment here?
Jim, do you want to pick out another one for us that you've
had? Got anything in the thread, or?
Let's take a look at the chat window. See if anyone's biting tonight.
They're talking about books for Kursk, and talking about Polish resistance in here as well, and talking about some Flames of War releases. So.
Oh, Yavasa's in the thread. Hey, what's going on, Yavasa? Big Dame, I just called you out on that assistance with the MI6 source at Ultra. I definitely appreciate that. You've also brings up a good point about Enigma code was broken by Polish people who sent the intelligence to Britain. This happened right before World War II started. the old, I can't remember the name of the philosopher, but there's an old Italian philosopher. He's like, defeat is always an orphan, victory has 100 fathers. The number of people that claim that they're the ones that broke the Enigma code, you pick up any book, you're going to find 10 people in there.
Yeah.
And that's because the Enigma code had to be broken several times. It's not people lying. It's not people, trying to, accrue undue glory onto their own countries or whatever. The Polish had a copy of the Enigma machine. They definitely sent it to British intelligence before the war started, like right before the invasion. That definitely did happen. Pretty soon, though, the Germans had added that fourth rotor wheel to the inside of the Enigma machine. The codes were now obsolete. Also, you could have all the Enigma codes you wanted, all the Enigma machines you wanted. If you didn't have the code books, that Enigma code wasn't going to do you much good until the British built the bronze goddesses, and you have these gigantic binary logic computing machines trying to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
You have some of the best mathematicians humanity has ever produced, locked up in these little cottages trying to break these codes. So there's a lot of conjecture as far as, well, did we break the Enigma code? Was it the British? Was it the Russians? It depends on who you ask, and depends on what time of the war. Yeah. But probably the first people were definitely, Yabas is absolutely right.
Yeah.
The first people were definitely the Polish.
It's definitely a case of everybody had a shot at it.
Yeah.
Everybody did their part towards it, and at certain stages of the war it worked, and at certain stages of the war it didn't work.
Yeah.
So you can tread that middle ground in history and say they were probably the first, but they certainly weren't the last. Everybody had a stab at it because it was important to everybody. Everybody needed to know the information that was coming through Enigma.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, figuring out the way to actually break the information war, actually knowing what your enemy's up to before they actually do it, absolutely crucial to winning any battle.
And good information gives you that moment at Kursk with the artillery fire from the Russian side just before the German artillery opens up. It gives you that, we have one up on you.
Yeah.
And you will always be one step behind us because we will know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, that's essentially it. Comment.
Yeah. Feel free to pick one out, James, from the one.
Alrighty. Toros does bring up a really good point, which we should probably bring up. We've been saying all through these article series that Kursk is unquestionably the largest battle there has ever been, and the numbers do back that up. However, he does bring up the counterpoint, to his credit, where he says, I would argue about Kursk being the mother of all battles, as I think every era has its battle. Napoleonics has its Leipzig, Ancients has its Gaugamela. Kursk is definitely a biggie, though. That's absolutely true. I mean, objectively, Kursk is the biggest. Objectively, 4.5 million men, 5,500 tanks and AFEs, 15,000 guns, something like 5,000 aircraft. Now, if you measure this in the scale of its time, however, some of the other battles would definitely be contenders. We've definitely mentioned battles like the Somme and Verdun, which had something like 2 million men engaged. Okay, well, 4.5 million men is bigger than 2 million men, but 2 million men versus however many men were on the Western Front in 1916 versus 4.5 million men, how many men were on the Eastern Front in 1943.
Yeah.
Those percentages are probably really, really close.
Yep.
So you can almost make the Tannenberg might be another contender in there. It also gets a little fuzzy sometimes. When does a battle become a campaign? And Kursk was the largest tank battle, and some people largest battle. Some people like to kind of revisionists, for example, like to kind of cut that down a little bit. And one of the big ways they do that is they kind of cut the battle off in Prokhorovka, which you absolutely should not do. I don't think. War is fought between two people. I mean, Operation Citadel and the classic Battle of Kursk, July 5th to July 13th, or July 12th, that's Prokhorovka. That's the German turn, okay? Find me a war game where you get a turn, and then when your turn's done, you go have coffee because the game's over, your opponent doesn't get a turn. I mean, I want to play that game. I might actually win one once in a while. The Soviets do get a turn, and that's Operation Kutuzov for Operation Vrubitschev. And that's when you see this other big part of Kursk that begins on July 13th, and it goes on till the middle of August. And that's where you see huge numbers of additional forces kind of enter into the battle, and those numbers crank even higher. Some people who want to say Kursk was even bigger than people say it is they like to call this. The Soviets were very good at phased offensives. They would launch an offensive, and if it started going well, they'd throw in the two armies on either side. and then they would expand it out a little bit, and after a month they'd throw in something else. And this is where you get into the idea, okay, when does Kursk become a campaign? This really comes in when you're trying to compare Kursk to, say, a battle like Normandy. Kursk versus Normandy is a joke if you only include like the first day of Normandy. That's 9 U.S. divisions, or 9 Allied divisions, 185,000 men. It's a pipsqueak, nothing. But Normandy is more than just the one day. I mean, some people call Normandy from June 6th all the way to the fall of Paris. That's no, because now you're in the Falaise Gap and the pocket of Argenton. You're talking about Normandy is now a campaign. So that's where it gets a little fuzzy as far as when a battle becomes a campaign and when you go, okay, this was the battle. And we're going to take these numbers and we're going to call this the largest battle it's ever been. And we're going to say it's 15 times bigger than this battle and 2.6 times the... It's fun to throw out numbers that precise, but you got to remember there's a little bit of subjectivity in there based on how you measure. So Taurus definitely brings up a very good point.
Yeah. Well, for myself in this, I always wonder, whenever you have these like older battles, should you perhaps look at the actual entire population of the world at the point of the battle to actually see what percentage of the world is actually taking part in that battle to determine its size in comparison?
You're potentially opening the scope a bit too wide at that point.
Okay.
I think taking in world population is great for when you're looking at something that's a natural disaster that involves millions and millions of people. So like you're talking about the plagues, you're talking about big tsunamis and stuff like that. That's when you sort of take the world population together and say, this percentage died because of this, or this percentage. Okay. You could take
the Spanish flu or the Black Plague. Stuff
absolutely.
Like
it's the same type of statistical information that they use. One guy on YouTube used to create how many people did World War II kill. Yeah. And he took it almost as if the war was a pandemic. And it was really fascinating because he was able to break it down who died where and when and why. And
this was the one where one of the
little symbols he used was 1,000 soldiers at the time.
Yeah, that was horrifying to watch. I have to.
I've seen that video. It's very highly recommended.
It is very good. My thoughts on when a battle becomes a campaign, I think it's pretty clear cut for me, kinda.
Right.
It's when an initial battle, when a good general or a good marshal in some Russian cases sees a battle going well, and as what happened in Kursk, when they realized after Prokhorovka that this is going pretty well for us now.
Yeah.
We've managed to stop the punch. Now we can counterpunch. That's when the battle starts to become a campaign, because not only is it just counter-attacking what you've lost, it's now pushing out and gaining what the Germans took, so that you're regaining your ground, plus you're starting to take chunks out of the territory that was previously theirs.
Yeah.
That's when I believe a battle becomes a campaign, where you're starting to reinforce success. You know, that thought of reinforcing success is when I think a battle becomes a campaign, and they start to realize we need to plan for the next step now, because this has worked. So let's say, for example, Operation Bagration later in the war.
Right.
When that starts to work really well, they're like, this could almost go all the way to Berlin, so let's start pumping stuff in behind it, and it's going to start to work for us.
Okay, I understand.
That's actually a really good comparison there, because I've done a little bit of reading and research on both of these battles, Bagration and Kursk. I would call Kutuzov and Rudnitsev part of the original Kursk battle. And the criteria that I'm going with is, okay, the Soviets knew that the Germans were going to hit them on the Kursk salient. They sat down and drew up a plan. Okay, absorbing the German offensive and grinding down those Panzer assets, that was the first phase of their plan. Now they're going to strike back. That's the second part of their plan. That's Operation Kutuzov and Rudnitsev. That goes to like the middle of August. Okay, that was the completion of their plan that they were setting up in April and May of 43. Where I think it starts to become more of a campaign is what you're talking about, reinforcing success. Okay, they've completed their original plan. Rudnitsev and Kutuzov have done really well. Let's expand this into the offensive that would eventually retake Kiev. This is in September, October, November of 43. Well, first of all, now you're like 6 months after the beginning of the Battle of Kursk, or 5 months. And number two, you're hundreds of miles away. This is when 8th Guards finally gets into it. And it wasn't part of that original operational plan that Stavka sat down and drew out. what I'm saying about the good comparisons, that Bagration definitely has that two-faced approach. Zhukov and its Belarusian fronts hit Army Group Center under Bush in June 22nd, 1944. The original plan was for it to go off at the exact same time the Allies landed at Normandy for maximum effect. Stalin said, you know what, they made us wait 3 years before they're opening up their second front. We're going to make them wait 3 weeks because I want to launch Operation Bagration on the 3rd anniversary of their invasion of Barbarossa. He was doing it for political and propaganda purposes. This invasion goes in, caves in Army Group Center, gets up to the gates of Warsaw, and as this offensive really starts going well, you see a new series of plans push into where all the Ukrainian fronts. This is Konyev's part of the army. The 1st and 2nd, 3rd Ukrainian front, 8th Guards armies mixed up down there somewhere. 1st Guards tank armies down there. And they started invading into Romania and Galicia and the stretches of southern Poland. That was not part of the original plan. That's definitely when a battle becomes more of a campaign.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's... I guess I also like to pick like the middle of the road. You know, don't have it just be at the end of Prokhorovka, but don't have it include everything the Soviets did in the second half of '43, because that's equally silly. Kind of stick to the middle. That's Operation Citadel, Operation Katakov, and Operation Rimny-Seb. That's the Battle of Kursk. Even though it expands into Belgorod, Kharkov, and to the north, Orel, and this is where we get into Justin's comment a little bit. That's the Battle of Kursk, and there's where those are at least the numbers that I'm pulling for my 4.5 million men, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Right. Anything in the comments that everybody's on about?
There's a fair bit of chat going on here.
Okay, what we got?
There's one here. Is it Intelligent Mr. Toad? It thinks further up. Yeah. Hi, Jim, John, and Justin. It now just disappeared. Basically asking us what our favourite units that were involved in Kursk would have been.
Right.
Or unit or I guess formation or vehicle type or something.
I can very easily pick a type.
Types is what he actually has in there.
Yeah. Well, Justin, do you want to fire off first?
For me, on the Eastern Front, I've always loved playing Germans whenever I go to World War II. I love playing with the big cats on the tabletops. I know they're not exactly accurate. They're expensive as hell. We've seen it in some of our old bold action games, where I would rock up with something like a Panzer IV, and it would literally just rock through everything you had, and it felt really unbalanced to me in some of those games. But I love the design aspect to the German vehicles. They just have that precision, that craft to them that just makes them something beautiful. Quite simply beautiful.
I look at all for you, Justin.
He holds up a model of the failure of Kursk.
Perhaps, but
totally.
For the actual design aesthetics of a Panther, to me that looks like a proper modern day tank in World War II.
Yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely. It's something a lot of the tank historians have recently been talking about, because I was watching. This was filmed a few years ago. This was Operation Think Tank. This was a load of historians that were joining up with World of Tanks to have a discussion in the Littlefield collection. And one of the questions was, what was the world's first, or was Centurion the world's first main battle tank? And one of the offhand comments was glorious, because the first offhand comment I heard from one of the historians was, I think Panther would argue with that. I was like, that's actually a good point. It is.
Panther would argue with that, and the T-34 would argue with that.
And I think Sherman would too.
But you see, for me...
Yeah. T-34 was out before the Sherman. Is the only thing I would.
It depends on how you're defining your main battle tank.
It also depends on how that particular tank was employed.
Now, for me, I look at it simply from the visual aesthetics of it. Whenever I look at Sherman, when I look at T-34, these do not look like main battle tanks to me. They don't have the aspects, the presence that a main battle tank brings with it.
To be fair, though, a Sherman isn't a small vehicle either.
It's not. Now, there is something else. Whenever we're playing with the miniatures and, essentially what is a representation of these vehicles on the tabletop, I don't care if you're playing 10mm, 15mm, 28mm, even 1/52nd scale. You do not have the idea of the scale and the presence of a vehicle until you've actually stood next to it.
Yeah, and living with a Sherman for 20 years of my life, I occasionally kept walking into the shed and just went, I keep forgetting that this thing's 9 feet wide, and it's like nearly 12 feet tall.
You remember the first time I walked in there, I went, oh, yeah, sure, and this is going to be... I'm sorry, it's how big?
Yeah.
Hello? Wow.
That was one of the Sherman's drawbacks, was its size. It was so tall. Not as tall as the Grand, but it was a big tank. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. What about
as far as like your definition of a main battle tank, this is mostly a shift in doctrine and design philosophy. In World Wars I, they had coming out with new tanks. Let's come out with tanks that do different jobs.
Yeah.
And interwar years, same thing. Early in the 30s, you had the cruiser tanks, infantry tanks. Germans had Panzer IVs to take out soft targets, Panzer IIIs to fight enemy tanks. The Soviets came out with the first idea of, you know what? I'm going to make one tank that does everything.
Yeah.
These BT-7s are super fast. They're too vulnerable. These T-28s are having, and T-35s have ridiculous firepower, but they're just too slow.
Yep.
Let's make up a tank that does a little bit of everything. That's a main battle tank. So the T-34 first rolls out in 1940, very limited numbers. It sees combat in 41, and again, very limited numbers, not nearly as much as people like to think. The first attempt at a main, at least from a design perspective, I'm not going to comment on its performance. From a design perspective, what the designers were trying to do, T-34 is probably the first main battle tank, especially when you consider how much the Panther's shape. I mean, we talk about the aesthetic of the tank.
Yeah.
Panther is basically a blinged out T-34 in certain aspects. The sloped armor on the front, on the sides, and the shape of its turret.
Yeah.
So the T-34 definitely inspired certain design elements of the Panther.
Yeah.
So the T-34 has got to come before the Panther as far as the main battle tank. I think the Centurion kind of wins that title sometimes in some discussions because it's one of the first post-war tanks that does really well.
Yeah.
And MBT is usually thought of as a post-war term.
Yeah. Okay, now, Jim, I have John vibrating and biting his lip here. What are you wanting to get out of your mouth, John?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're like a bulldog with a bumblebee.
I'm going to seriously throw a curveball at the whole main battle tank thing.
Oh, crap.
Because I've been having to think while we were talking about it. I was like, actually, no, that doesn't fit as an MBT. That doesn't fit as an MBT. That's 1/35th, by the way, Chloe, who's watching on YouTube. That Panther is 1/35th scale. I just had to throw it out there.
Sorry, I was having a cheeky look at
the Tiger as well.
Yeah.
So what we define as a modern main battle tank is a single vehicle that can do multi-purpose.
Yeah.
T-34 can't fit that because T-34 was designed, built, and initially utilized as a medium tank.
Right.
It was meant to be a fast vehicle in support of a KV-1.
Right.
So KV-1s were your breakthrough.
Yeah.
T-34s followed up in this whole, almost like the Blitzkrieg idea. Your tanks punch the hole, everything else follows through that. So the idea initially was that KV-1s took the brunt of the fire because they were monstrously well armored at the time.
Yeah.
So they punched through, and then the T-34s would follow and do the whole spreading out and causing chaos. The next contender for a main battle tank, historically as they're built, Sherman.
Okay.
Yes, again designed as a medium tank.
Yeah.
Because again, at the time, it was to run in support of the M3s, like the early model and late model Stuarts.
Yeah.
So they were running in tandem with that, again as a sort of, we take the fire.
Yeah, 1-2 combo.
Yeah, we do a 1-2, like even if in some American terms the tank role is reversed and it's the Stuart going forward first.
Yeah.
Because it technically at the time had a better anti-tank.
Really?
Actually.
Yeah.
That high velocity 37mm.
Yeah. So then you move on and then you see Panther.
Yes.
Panther to me is the main contender for a main battle tank.
Yeah.
Because at the time you see Panzer III, Panzer IV work together.
Yeah.
Even Tiger to an extent had to work with other stuff.
Yeah.
It needed the early Schwerpanzerabteilungs. I think it was a bunch of Tigers, but a bunch of Panzer IVs or IIIs in support.
Yeah.
So
mostly threes. Yeah.
Mostly threes. Yeah. So Panther to me would be the main first contender for main battle tank because it does two things that the other tanks don't do.
Yeah.
It is essentially a multi-role vehicle. It can fire good HE, good AP.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was designed more to take on the tanks.
Yeah.
But it could fire at both. It had a multi-purpose gun, which is an important definition in tank
it's
design.
an important step.
Yep.
Yeah.
Secondly, it ran on its own. The units that were equipped with Panther weren't supported by other armoured vehicles to help them support themselves in other ways. So the Panther was a self-sufficient weapon in the field when deployed as a Zug or a battalion or whatever. I'm tearing apart my own thoughts on main battle tanks because really, I would have considered Centurion to be the first.
Yeah.
But even Centurion doesn't fit the main battle tank role initially because it was rolling with Conqueror when it came out.
All right. Well, we're actually way off base for the actual question we were asked.
Yeah.
What is your unit or vehicle?
Oh yeah, I was going to say, what was the question?
Yeah, we should probably answer that.
Yeah, perhaps. You know, I'm gonna rein us back in here for a second.
Yep.
So for me, it's Panther. John, what is it for you?
It is the Russian 76mm anti-tank gun in the Toad configuration.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
And I can't remember.
That's what Kursk is really all about.
Yeah, and I can't remember what its definition
is going to dovetail into some other questions, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the reason I'm picking that, it was the darling unit of the Soviet army in the Kursk salient.
I see.
And I think it was probably Kursk that got the tactics down pat.
Yeah.
Because up until then, anti-tank gun philosophy with the Russians was big long line of them, shoot, do whatever you want. What they did at Kursk, and then practically at every defensive battle after that, not that there was that many after Kursk, they set up pockets. So there was, imagine a triangle shape.
All right.
So the two outer wings of the triangle are facing. So the enemy is approaching a flat side of this triangle.
Yes.
There are two guns sat there.
All right.
They're hidden, they're concealed, they're camouflaged.
Yeah.
They're also not firing.
Oh.
The back one is firing.
Right.
So this one that's maybe a few hundred meters back from the two outliers, he's the one that's being given the attention by the attacking force.
So he's baiting them.
So they're coming in.
Yeah.
So you have all these brand spanking new Tigers and Panthers and all the good upgun Panzer IVs, and they're going, there's an anti-tank gun over there. Whoom, they start to close to engage it.
Yeah.
Now suddenly they are now between two other guns.
I see.
Or two other nests of guns, because in a lot of cases it was nests.
Oh, multiple guns.
Of maybe 5 guns apiece.
Right.
So you drive a tank battalion in through that, they're now side armour onto everything, because they're too busy engaging the one at the front.
Yeah.
Which is sat back going, we're just firing, doesn't matter if we hit anything, because my friends are about to open up and you're going to be destroyed.
Yeah, so I'm guessing the Germans would hit a certain point, at which point the Russians would go, that'll do, right, in the sides, in the back.
And this is for me, when Kursk happens, this is where the Russian army gets that confidence. It stands up on its own 2 feet and goes, we can beat the summer Germans, as we've said before.
Yeah.
We can beat the Germans in the summer.
Yeah.
We have the tactics down. Our men are better trained. Our equipment's gotten better.
Yeah.
You know, our leadership, for the most part, is pretty good. They're still suffering a bit of this scared to think too much, because the guy from the Stasi is like looking over your shoulder, or the GRU are looking over their shoulder going, are you thinking of something that doesn't quite line up with what we want you to do? Because if you're doing that, I mean, there's a pistol right here to the back of your head.
Yeah.
There was still a fear of that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure your battle plan aligns with the international socialist proletariat ideal. Let's have a discussion about the politics of your order to retreat. Glorious comrade Stalin is disappointed in your... never mind.
My apologies, Mark. I call the Stasi as a Cold War East Germany. Never mind. The GRU.
We're probably talking about the NKVD.
NKVD.
The forerunner of the KGB post.
Yeah. So that is my darling unit of Kursk.
Okay.
Is that 76mm anti-tank gun.
Yeah.
Generally, the anti-tank gun units as a whole, but the 76 basically was the baby of it all. So.
Okay.
The new 85s were just coming out.
Yeah.
I don't know, their numbers were very, very limited, but the new 85mm Toad and then eventually the Su-85 anti-tank assault gun. There are 2 regiments that carried them with 5th Guards Tank Army. I don't think they got into combat at Prokhorovka. There's a picture of them at Prokhorovka. I did apologize for it in the caption of that image. So when you see it in part 4, just read the caption. There's a little bit of a thing in there.
All right.
But yeah, the 85s are just starting to come out as far as, your darling, as far as the anti-tank units at Kursk. But yeah, the 76.2 divisional gun is definitely the main workhorse as far as that the pack front of the Eastern Front goes.
Yeah.
All right, Jim, what is your darling unit of Kursk?
If you say Panther, I'm going to come over there.
I say Panther.
Wait, you don't have a passport.
All right, I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this. Okay, as far as talking about different, unit types or whatever. Mm-hmm. You've got some divisions as far as like what's my favorite unit. I'm going to go with Gross Deutschland Panzer Grenadier Division. Mm-hmm. Is my favorite unit for Kursk on the German side, and that's because it was a unit that has an elite status. It does a great deal of combat on both Western and Eastern fronts. Once it got into Russia in '41, it never left the Russian front, unlike the SS Panzer Grenadier divisions that shuffle all over the place. Panzer Grenadier Division Gross Deutschland was just in Russia, and these guys got ridiculously experienced, ridiculously elite. They were a very high-profile unit, politically speaking, so they were able to constantly accrue the best recruits. They got the best equipment. They were the only division at Kursk to have any Panthers, much to people's regret who likes to put Panthers with the SS Panzer Grenadier divisions. No. Only the Gross Deutschland division had them. They got them well before even the SS Panzer Grenadier divisions got them. These are some of the best troops anywhere in the German war machine. They have the best equipment. They have their own integral bolted-in company of Tigers, which almost nobody has. They've got all the best equipment. They've got all the best officers. So a lot of their officers are some of the most famous German tank aces of the war. You've got Heydrich von Strachwitz. This is the Panzer Count. He was an old Prussian count from before the war. He leads Panzer Grenadier Divisions or Panzer Regiment at Kursk until he stands in the way of his tank's recoil and he breaks his elbow inside the turret. When his own gun breaks his elbow, this guy's got tank kills out the wazoo, and he's a colonel by this point. He's running around with his own regiment. The real reason I really like to play with Panzer Grenadier Gross Deutschland, they have all the best toys, they have all the best troops, you get to play with the big cats. In fact, at Kursk, they're the only division that get to play with all the big cats, Panthers and Tigers, even though Panthers didn't do very well. But they're not an SS Panzer division. Mm. And leaving aside some small incidents in Yugoslavia, Panzer Grenadier Gross Deutschland is one of the cleanest units as far as all the politics and the war crimes and all the horrible stuff you have to deal with when you're playing the Germans in World War II. If you're a war gamer, you don't want to get bogged down in all kinds of problems as far as commentary and politics. Pick Panzer Grenadier Division Gross Deutschland. They were in the war the whole way. They were always out in front. They were never not engaged. They have all the best equipment, and they were pretty. They're still a Gross Deutschland society today. One last thing about Panzer Grenadier Gross Deutschland is that they weren't provincial. As their name suggests, Greater Germany, these guys were drawn from all over Germany, whereas most divisions in the German Wehrmacht at the time were drawn from certain towns. Mm. So especially if you're somebody who has friends in Germany or if you're from Germany and you want to play a force, you don't have to worry about, well, these guys are mostly from Stuttgart, or these guys are mostly from Bavaria, these guys are mostly from around Pomerania or Berlin or Saxony. These guys were from all over the place. They're a slice of the best that the German army has to offer in multiple categories: tactical, technological, even political and moral. They're the best of what the German army has to offer in World War II. Mm-hmm. They are very deeply engaged at Kursk. They're not in Prokhorovka, but they hold the whole left wing of Prokhorovka wide open. They're the spearhead of 48th Panzer Corps during this battle. They fight some of the largest tank battles that subsequently follow Kursk, all the way through Romania and all the way through the end of the war. They're definitely a great unit to play from the German perspective. And from the Soviet perspective, I picked 1st Guards Tank Army. Even though at Kursk they weren't actually a Guards Tank Army yet, this is Mikhail Efimovich Kalagov's 1st Tank Army. He would later become the 1st Guards Tank Army, and this is the guy at the spear point of Berlin. He's in the war the whole way. He is actually wounded in a training accident when the Soviets are first invaded in 1941. He's in hospital. He does the classic, I'm going to break out of hospital and go to join my unit in the middle, even though my arm's still in a cast or whatever was wrong with him. And then when he gets there, he takes over. He actually commands the Soviet Union's 1st Guards Tank Brigade, when the Soviet army kind of gives up on the idea of tank divisions, we can't make it work. We're going to instead go with the brigades. He gets a brigade, even though it's something of a demotion for him. He was commanding a division, now he commands a brigade. He gets involved in some battles. He becomes leader of the 1st Guards Tank Brigade. He will eventually command the 1st Guards Tank Army. This guy's at Stalingrad. This guy's at Kursk. He's at Bagration. He's at Berlin. And he literally wrote the book on a lot of the tactics that John's mentioning. Hidden ambushes, what the Soviets would call perestroika. This is battlefield concealment. This is probably a whole other question we can get into later. This is where a lot of this comes right out of Katakov's playbook that he writes in September and October 1941, when he's fighting Guderian at Matensk and some of the other battles leading up past Orel towards Tula, the big south hook towards Moscow. He's just like one of my favorite guys. Again, if there's like an elite Soviet tank force or whatever, it's going to be Katakov's 1st Tank Army. So those are my 2 picks for Kursk.
Okay, very cool. Very interesting choices.
Very, very concise as well. Mm-hmm. But I like the fact that you went for like the bigger units, and I went for like something that's a bit more specialized, and you went for...
I went for the pretty kitty.
Yeah, you went for a tank, strangely enough, and I didn't. I went for a tank killer.
Yeah, but you now no longer have a tank at home, you now have a anti-tank gun at home.
This is a good point.
It's what you're being exposed to.
I wonder if it's a cultural shift at home.
But, no, it's just what you're being exposed to.
You're getting so meta, Justin. It's all about what's going on outside the studio.
Well, I hope everybody out there is enjoying our random ramblings through Kursk at the moment.
This actually dovetails into a comment that came in from or a question that came in on one of the comment streams where John was talking about anti-tank guns instead of tanks. Where Ollie P was talking about his bolt-action Germans for the Eastern Front. He's got a bolt-action army. It's 28mm, obviously. It's Eastern Front themed. So he figures it's about time, quote, to dust them off as they haven't been out for a while. I just need to convince my old gaming friend to bring out his Russians again. So this is something that we touched on in the previous interview. We touched on it many, many times in the article series, and I want to hit it again here in the live stream. Is probably the most popular World War II games out there are games like Bolt Action and Chain of Command. They're 28mm. Yeah. Once you get into 28mm gaming, you're talking about mostly infantry.
Yeah.
I don't want to alienate or kind of section off, 60% of the World War II gaming community and saying, well, we're doing an article series on Kursk. Kursk is, history's largest tank battle, blah, blah, blah. All you infantry guys, sorry. This absolutely is not true, and this goes into what John was talking about earlier with the anti-tank guns. Wanted to make the point that games like Bolt Action and Chain of Command and other 28mm infantry-heavy games definitely have a huge role to play in anything about Kursk. Kursk has this reputation as the mother of all tank battles. They shouldn't shy away from playing Kursk-themed games. This is because Kursk, depending on how you measure it, is really only like 5% of a tank battle. The rest of it is infantry and anti-tank guns. And so what the Soviets did was they would build these belts of defense that extended back dozens or even hundreds of miles. And these defense points were strung together, they were anchored, so to speak, on these hilltops, railroad stations. We do some battles like this in part 2 of the article series. Little hilltops covered with trees, villages and state farms, these little landmarks that the Soviets can fortify, and they sort of form these little pylons. And these pylons are then strung together with anti-tank pack fronts, like John was talking about, infantry trenches, artillery, multiple layers of artillery, and minefields. Something like 4 or 5 million mines the Soviets laid around the Kursk salient. It comes out to something like over 2,000 mines per kilometer. If you stop to think about it, a mine is this big around.
Yeah.
Your mines are almost touching at this point, because a kilometer is only 1,000 meters.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're not set up in an actual straight line, but just to illustrate the density of these minefields. Mm-hmm. So much of this battle, especially the early phases, are German SS Grenadiers, Panzer Grenadiers from divisions like Grossdeutschland, having to go, and assault engineers, the pioneers, having to go in and attack these little mini castles, these little fortified strongpoints, anti-tank guns, minefields, and Soviet infantry in the south. Soviet Guards rifles. Talking about your favorite type of unit. Soviet Guards rifles are just amazing, I think. Mm-hmm. pushing forward against these Soviet rifle and guards rifle divisions in these little towns, these little copses of woods, these hilltops, these train stations. These are bolt-action battles and chain-of-command battles waiting to happen. And they are absolutely vital because you can't send in the panzers until you break open places like Cherkasskoye, Hill 242, Verkopenie. These are battles that we're going to see in Part 3. Battles like, or Srtsevo is also in Part 3. Part 2, we have Marlo Archangel Station, where we see the Nashorns fight, not Nashorns, Ferdinand Elephants, and the Grizzlies fight. These are mostly infantry battles. Look at the Panzer Leader maps. You're going to see a bunch of little infantry counters and a bunch of Soviet infantry counters. And the tanks are kind of in the wings waiting their turn. So anyway, just wanted to make the point really, really strongly. Once again, don't let the idea that Kursk is a tank battle, quote unquote, dissuade anyone from breaking out their infantry armies and really going to town at Kursk.
Yeah. Definitely a good shout.
When you have a battle that size, your armored divisions almost, well, they pretty much take a secondary role, because your main force for attacking a defensive position, especially one that was insanely well done as the Kursk salient, your tanks are just going to run into brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. You know, they're going to run into the minefields, then they're going to run into the anti-tank nests, then they're going to run into villages, and tanks don't like urban environments.
No, not particularly.
Especially unsupported tanks.
Especially if there's a Molotov.
Yep.
You know, a guy with a Molotov, that's a bad day.
Yep, they don't like that, and it seems that some modern militaries still haven't learned that. But there you go. Yeah. So what you find is that all this infantry has to do all the legwork, and as Jim was saying, then the tanks can do their thing and come in, but...
Yeah. And then we see it's... When in history have you ever seen a single unit type operate in isolation? There are certain tasks that each unit type within a military organization will take care of.
Yep.
Sadly, you see it very often, but to your point, it never goes well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly.
It never goes well.
No.
You find small actions like Wittmann's charge in Villers-Bocage.
Yeah.
Where you find a single squadron of tanks versus a regiment that clearly was on the back foot because it was making breakfast.
Yes.
And 4 tigers rolling over the hill at you while you're trying to cook some eggs in some crappy little hexamine stove is not a good way to start your day.
No, especially with it being the British, wasn't it? You know, they haven't had their tea yet.
You haven't had your tea. You're not a capable fighting force unless you've had your brew in the morning. Yeah. And then you can hop into that Firefly and become an effective weapon. Unfortunately, Wittmann's seen that and thought, I'll have you.
I don't think that's the exact thought that went through his head.
His quote was, "I will surprise the English as much as they surprised me."
Right.
Because he woke up in the morning to the sound of this stuff turning up. And then went, hang on a minute. And went to a little hedge and went...
You ruined my breakfast, I'm going to ruin your breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. I was just having mine. I was making sure the rest of my unit was turning up.
Okay, so suddenly World War II becomes one-upmanship on who can be the bigger asshole.
It felt like Wittmann's seen all this and went... Handbags are done, gentlemen. I'm going to get into my tank and I'm going to show you what a real...
Hello, Jim, did you see what happened to John at the Battlefront open day?
I saw where he was playing Wittmann at Villers-Bocage. Yeah, yes. I did see that.
Yes.
Did he do well? I don't know.
He finished his game, and the guys running the game literally turned in and said, "I don't know how you did that. No one's ever got that high a score before." And his score was not defeated until the afternoon.
No, I got 38 points overall. And they'd said that their highest up to that point had been 32, 36, or something like that.
Yeah.
They said, you almost broke 40, and I was like, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself.
Yeah.
And then two guys later got a 46 and a 41, and I was like...
they must have killed everything.
They must have killed everything. I have a feeling they targeted the transports when I was ignoring them.
Possibly.
But that's actually the historical solution, because I was looking at the order of battle on that, and from what I remember, most of Wittmann's kills in that historical engagement are like Bren carriers and stuff. Firing a Tiger at a Bren carrier, really? I mean, okay, I guess.
Fly Swat Bazooka, we're in the ballpark.
It's kind of funny because the famous part of that engagement is Wittmann driving along a road blowing stuff up.
Yeah.
But the real engagement was happening several hundred meters up that road in Villers-Bocage, because that's where the rest of his unit was.
Yeah.
They had 4 Tigers engaging a squadron of the British armoured, and Wittmann's just like, I'll catch up, guys. I have a few things to do back here first.
Yeah, give me a minute. Give me a minute.
All this British infantry sat there with their Bren carriers, with the 6-pounders still on the back of them, with their canvas covers on them, and they see this thing coming up the road, and they go, "Oh bugger!
Yeah,
there's nothing we can do. Get into a ditch. He's going to kill us. Just get out of here."
Yeah, we can get more equipment. Let him have it.
Yeah, we can replace the Bren carrier, but we can't replace
you,
Bob Davis over here.
Yeah, at least for 18 years.
Yeah, because he's the gunner of that gun, and if we lose the gun, that's fine. But he's a trained gunner.
Yeah.
Right.
Full Auto 23 says his favorite weapon for Kursk would be the Soviet anti-tank rifle, which is a pretty good point. He
interesting choice.
These vehicles, these rifles don't really have much of a chance against against German tanks or armor in any way. But here's the thing, and this is something that armies run across as late as Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. You can let the tanks pass. After that tank, you're going to have a fuel truck, or you're going to have a half track, or you're going to have an APC. And that Soviet anti-tank rifle, that 14.5 millimeter anti-tank rifle, is going to do just fine against those kind of soft-skinned vehicles, or even lightly armored vehicles. So definitely a good call on that one.
I have to say a thing.
Yeah, go.
In fact, actually, Marquard's just said it.
Okay.
The PTRD was still fine on Panzer III and 4s without skirts. That's it exactly. Markov just said it. In fact, Schertzen was developed for the anti-tank rifles. And it was.
So it just had the nice side effect.
It's a very common misconception. This is great, Markov. Thank you for that, because now I can ramble again.
Brace yourselves.
So the common misconception in history, because again, this is harking back to Western Allies wrote all the history on the Western Front, so they didn't have anti-tank rifles to the same extent. We had the British Boys anti-tank rifle, which was a pile of crap. We had a couple other things, but they were never deployed in that heavy a use, because for some reason the British went with the Piat, and the Piat's a pile of crap anyway, and the American M1 bazooka is not much better than it.
Right.
The only fact is that with the M1 bazooka you can reload it quicker. Much the same warhead, kinda.
Yeah.
But the Piat was a complete pile of trash.
Yeah.
Think of a crossbow. Imagine taking a crossbow into World War II, except for Mad Jack Churchill, who took a longbow.
Yeah,
that's a different story. And a broadsword.
Yeah, like, what was it? He left it behind in a village one day?
And just went back to get it.
Yeah, he went back to get it.
Yeah. This is the guy who was
cursing out the Americans for A-bombing Japan. He's like, damn those Americans and their A-bombs. We could have gotten another good 10 years out of this war.
So,
yeah, he's Mad Jack, all right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Mad Jack. Back to anti-tank rifles.
Yeah.
So, because we didn't use them in the West, everybody thought, or all the historians that examined German tanks and stuff after Normandy and getting through to Berlin and that, figured that because these side skirts were pretty decent against a shaped charge or a hollow charge, that's what they were there for.
Yeah.
We didn't use anti-tank rifles to the same extent as the Russians did.
Yeah.
That's what they were for. So every piece of history was there. They were to stop bazookas and Piats getting through the armour.
I bet no.
To use shaped charges, like defeat shaped charge rounds.
Yeah, it was just a happy coincidence.
We didn't really use shaped charge much, and we didn't use it anywhere near on the same level. Yeah,
was the shaped charge?
Yeah, we didn't use it. We kind of were developing it.
Yeah.
There was ways and means that we were working on it through 17-pounder and a couple other anti-tank guns.
Yeah.
But we never used anti-tank rifles that much to even let the Germans think that it would have been worth doing that. The Schertzen came from the Eastern Front. Yeah. Because in the early stages, in fact, nearly throughout the entirety of the war, all German tanks, bar the big cats, with the exception of Panther, had side armour of 15 millimeters, 20 millimeters.
So reasonably light.
Pretty light.
Pretty poor. Even the Panther side armour is pretty weak.
Yeah, it's only about 20 millimeters on the side of Panther. And what they were finding was, again, like these tactics at Kursk, the tanks would drive past. This guy with this cheaply made rifle was putting holes through the side of Panzer IIIs and 4s and killing crew and setting tanks on fire. Because you get a big enough bullet through the side of an engine compartment, you've probably set the tank on fire. Yeah. Or broke the engine at least. Yeah. So the Germans went, there's two things we can do. We can increase the side armour of the tank. Yeah. And then at that point the designers still had their heads screwed on, and they went, no, because that would make...
We'd have to re-engineer it.
We'd have to re-engineer the tank. Yeah. It would become heavier. We'd need to look at a new transmission or a new engine.
Yeah, I wish they'd looked at a new engine.
And they said, screw that. Let's play with alternative methods of armor, applique armor. So they started to, like on the Panzer IIIs in particular, they had that little bit of spaced armor in the front, a bit of applique. And then they realised we can continue this on down the side of the vehicle and put it in big sheets.
Yeah, and put it on the turret as well. And if that breaks, we just pull it off, put it in the battle.
Because the sole purpose of Scherzen was that when the anti-tank rifle bullet hit it, it would deform. Yeah. It would bend the tip of the bullet and cause it to rotate. It's now lost so much energy, it has no penetration power to get through the armour once it's done.
Yeah, it's lost the actual, the point of the bullet, where it's actually, the force of it is basically put to that one tiny little point.
Yeah. Because the problem with the Scherzen as it was back then against shape charge is that in many cases it actually aided the armor penetration value of the shape charge.
Really?
This was a study that was done by the Americans as well when they were looking at alternative forms of applique armor for Shermans and stuff, because they kept hearing all the horror stories.
Well, you had the sandbags, you had the logs, people were throwing anything on there.
So you found there was a big study going on in the States to figure out what was effective against the shape charge. Yeah. And they realised nothing. They found that a lot of applique armour that could be bolted on in the field was actually making the shape charge more effective.
Right.
So standoff armour, as the Germans would have been using it and the Americans were playing with spare track links and stuff, was helping the jet of the shape charge form correctly. Because of the technology at the time, fusing technology was crap.
Yeah.
So when the Panzerfaust or a shape charge hit something, it needed a fuse in the nose to send a signal back to the detonator in the back of the shell to go, now blow up.
Yeah.
But they were finding that signal was taking too long to get from one end to the other, and what was sometimes happening is the shell would just deform and just cowpat up the side of the vehicle and then explode and do nothing.
Yeah.
So basically, that defeats the whole purpose of the spaced armor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the spaced armor then, it's slowing it down for a second, even just a microsecond, and going, okay, you now have time to get the signal and form.
Yeah. It's giving that shell, that jet, that cone, time to invert and become that big needle point that goes through the armor.
Yeah, and then sprays like molten copper all through your tank, which is nothing.
The Americans figured out that it was safer not to put any applique on.
Yeah.
Because you would occasionally, especially on the front of a Sherman, which has a just under a slight 50-degree slope on the front.
Yeah.
That's still a very hard target to hit.
Yeah.
With something like a Panzerfaust, because it could potentially ricochet, it could potentially deform itself before the round actually detonated.
Yeah.
It didn't happen that often, but the chance was there.
Yeah.
The problem is that with extra track and stuff, it would allow what's called normalization.
Right. Now we're getting into physics. Are you ready, everybody?
So the shell would hit and then start to rotate.
Yeah.
And as it started to rotate, the fuse would detonate, and then it would have this perfect, good distance from the armor, good space, and it would just go straight through as if there was nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
So you ruined a lot of stuff by adding applique. So Scherzen was for anti-tank rifle and probably proved to be kind of rubbish against shape charge at the time.
Which we didn't really use to begin with.
No.
Okay.
It was there, but we didn't use it that much.
Fair enough. James, your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. As far as whenever the enemy rolls out a new piece of technology or equipment, they think, oh, they're doing this as a counter against everything that we've got going on. And that's absolutely not the case. You've got the Soviets fighting against the Germans as early as 1941, and that's where the real tank action, nothing against, the Sherman or the Churchill or any of the other tank actions, El Alamein, the Battle of the Bulge, Market Guard, any of the stuff that happened in the West, everything that happened, that was the JV squad, so to speak. That was the secondary front as far as tanks go. And you can see this as early as 1942, when the Germans are absolutely afraid to use Mark IIIs. They had to in some cases, but they really didn't like to use Mark IIIs, even Mark III specials in the East. But they would do just fine in North Africa. And then later on, the later versions of the Mark IV, they saved all those for Russia. Second string stuff, they sent down to North Africa because it's just Lees and Shermans down there. We're not right, and Crusaders. We're not too worried about that. So as far as like cutting edge German technology, and I mean, Scherzen isn't really cutting edge technology, but cutting edge new German countermeasures, this is all against the Soviets. Soviets don't have anything shape charge wise. They just have these PTRD rifles, and even if they're terrible, and even if only like 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 is ever going to hit anything, It's an anti-tank rifle. Every platoon has at least a couple of these.
Yeah.
And how much, Soviet infantry do you have? It's to the point where Panzer Leader doesn't even make up a unit for the PTRD. It's assumed to be baked in to every platoon. So every single piece that you mount in that game, or that you play in that game, has a PTRD already baked into its combat values. And it allows the Soviet infantry unit in that game a limited anti-tank value, especially in close assault, that is actually pretty remarkable. I would absolutely agree with what John was saying about the PTRD.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. Very, very cool. Anything interesting coming on the live chat?
I did see something here. Oh, Yavasa was talking about as far as his favorite unit, or Yavaline. His favorite unit, as far as where the Soviets would go, would be Soviet artillery and the Soviet howitzers. I would definitely have to agree with that.
Yeah.
We just got done expounding for like 17 paragraphs about how important German infantry was in the opening phases of Kursk. How do you shut down attacking infantry? You do it with artillery. Because as that German artillery is coming, or German infantry is coming at you, they're crossing your ground. That ground is pre-sighted. You've already got all the maps laid out. You're ready to go. You've got your firing points laid in. Your firing solutions locked into your howitzers. You're going to be, blowing the hell out of these people as they're trying to approach your minefields. Then they get bogged down in your minefields. You've got guys on their belly with bayonets trying to poke their way through the ground until they hit the side of a mine, dig it up. You're doing that under Soviet artillery fire? Come on. But it shows how brave some of these German pioneers were. And how important Soviet artillery could really be.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you find that even at this stage in the Eastern Front, the German army, as from the basic bare bones infantrymen, are still incredibly highly motivated.
Yes.
They still know their job to the letter, and they've trained long enough to know that I'm going to be under artillery fire here, I'm going to be taking a whole load of crap thrown at me.
Yeah.
But I have the training, I have the confidence that I can still do it.
Yes.
Now, that confidence started to waver probably around Kursk, maybe just before it, and certainly did after it.
Yeah.
Because once the Russians realized we can beat the summer Germans, that was it. That was the start of the steamroller that ended in Berlin.
Well, once the Soviet forces got moving, that's... How the hell did you even think of stopping that?
Yeah.
Well, the Soviets also had a thing where... You see this a lot in Barbarossa, and some of that stuff I was talking about earlier with Katakov and how he was trying to build a Soviet tank doctrine. He started off commanding 20th Tank Division. I've got his diary. His diary lists per day his tank losses. His units and his tank crew are dying faster than he can replace them. There's no time for the unit as a, mostly I do, everyone knows, mostly larger unit-based war games. There's no time for that unit as a whole, as a body of men, to become more experienced because everyone's dying too quickly. And it's really only with Stalingrad and then leading definitely into Kursk. It's not really one event, it's kind of a curve. But where the Soviets finally get to that tipping point, where their people are living just long enough to pass on some of their information, some of their combat experience, and overall the unit gets better. The overall unit gets better, it loses less people in the next battle. More people survive. The unit it's a self-perpetuating process.
Yeah.
Whereas before, your losses are 90% every time you go out. You get in 90%, 90% new farm boys who don't know anything. They're aiming the rifle the wrong way or something. Your units are never going to get any better.
Yeah.
And it's only after these other battles that tipping point finally comes, and the Soviets really that's a part of that momentum. It's not just physical momentum; it's a momentum of unit experience that really starts to show.
Yeah. And it's something that the Germans rolled into Russia with a heck of a lot of.
Yeah.
Because they'd suffered so few casualties, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Few casualties through the Western campaign. And then when they turned east, they had all that experience they'd gained against Poland, Belgium, France, and
everywhere they fought through first. Yeah.
Yeah. So they knew what they were... Well, I say they knew. They were ready for what they were going to face in Russia.
Yeah.
And the early Russian campaign essentially gave them that false sense of confidence.
Yeah.
That gained confidence. We can beat the Russians. This is great. They're falling apart around us. And then Stalin turned around and said, "Stop!" And everybody stopped. And he went, "Turn around." Everybody turned around. He said, "March back." And they all started marching back. And that's essentially what happened. And the Russians just sort of gained momentum.
Yeah.
And it's through that attrition that you see that experience starting to build up, where the more confident, the more trained, the more experienced guys start to say, head down now, instead of run forward. They start shouting, get behind that wall.
Yeah.
Or use that rifle here. Aim there. There's a machine gun there. Prioritize that.
Yeah.
And the Germans have the opposite happening.
Yeah.
We see this at Kursk. Everyone knows about why the Panthers did so terrible at Kursk. One of the reasons that many people don't know too much about is these Panthers, because they were so new, they hadn't had time to really train on them yet. And the crews of these Panthers, you think you would put your best guys in your best tanks? These are the noobest of the noobs. These guys that went into, 10th Panther Brigade. This is Panzer Regiment 39. So that's Panzer Regiments 51 and 52. It's the only 2 Panther regiments that you see at Kursk. They go into a town called Cherkasskoye on July 5th, 1943. This is the opening of the Battle of Kursk. Yeah. They're supposed to be bolted onto the back of Großdeutschland Panzer Division, Panzer Grenadier Division, helping them break through this sector. And there's all the technological problems with the Panther, which, I mean, I'm sure John can get into that. There's also the regiment's commander, Colonel Laucher, does not get along with the aforementioned Heinz von Strauchwitz or Hornlein as Großdeutschland's division commander. These guys all hate each other, so they're not talking to each other. And these guys are like brand new, wet behind the ears. They barely graduated boot camp. These are the guys that are driving these Panthers. Yeah. And they roll through there, and because these commanders weren't talking together, when Großdeutschland shifted its position and attacked it from a slightly different angle, nobody told the Panthers. The Panthers went in on the original position. Now they're alone and exposed. Justin was asking earlier about what happens when tanks go in without infantry support. The Panthers will tell you, they sink in this mud, in this ravine. They all get stuck. They're also in a minefield. So now you've got brand new troops who've never really been shot at before. They're in these tanks that barely have enough engine power to drive their transmissions. They really don't, for reasons we'll probably get into later. And now they're being fired at in a minefield. And they're stuck. They're getting hit on the flanks. They're getting hit from all sides from these 76.2 millimeter anti-tank guns that John was mentioning earlier. And what do the drivers do? They panic and they hit the gas. And they just rip that gas as hard as they possibly can. And the transmission just eats itself into junk because they're not experienced. So don't rock it back and forth. Get yourself out of the mud. Wait for one of your buddies to come up there and tow you out of the mud. Calm down, calm down, calm down. They don't calm down. They just hit that gas and they destroy it. Something like 75% of the Panthers didn't make it through that first day. Yeah. And a lot of them blew themselves up. And these special rules are working to our war games. They either tore out their transmission, there was a problem with the exhaust system, not all the fuel burned properly, and so the inside of the exhaust pipes got like this semi-burnt gel gas in there. Until that got too hot, caught fire, engine blows up, fuel blows up, hydraulic fluid blows up. And a lot of it's due to crew inexperience. Okay. So as the Soviets are getting more and more experience on these averages, like unit averages I keep talking about, the Germans are having the exact opposite problem. Too many people are dying, and as they die, there's no one to teach the new guys. Your unit is now less experienced. They die even faster. Yeah. The guys that are left are having to be spread out across more and more units as the Germans try to hold the front together. And it just becomes a self-perpetuating problem where you have eventually Hitler Youth, 12-year-olds with Panzerfaust trying to take out Soviet tanks in the streets of Berlin. And it just doesn't work.
Yeah. It becomes a very sort of... Once the tables start to turn, they really turn.
Yeah, it cycles up and cycles up.
Yeah. Now, there is a question in the chat I want to attack.
Yeah, sure. What do we got?
Dave Clark, I know that Kursk was a summer action, but were there any noticeable weather supply morale lulls in the battle? Now, this is a good one because I want to talk about Panther. Yeah. But I'm not going to talk about it yet. Okay. Because I want to attack this, because this is an interesting one, because this goes... this falls in line with what we've been talking about with tipping points and stuff. Yeah. When does a battle's momentum slow to the point that the other side can go, now we punch them? Yeah. Or what's conditions like with the Panthers in the ravine getting stuck in mud? Yeah. There's a lull. There's a unit that sat there now going completely freaked out because in their brand new tanks have suddenly crapped themselves and they're sat in the middle of a minefield being shot at going, uh-oh. Yeah. So, Jim, what about weather supply morale? What lulls were we seeing in Kursk?
kind of lulls we see in Kursk? Well, every night you'd see something of a lull because people didn't have, all weather fighting conditions at the time yet. So you have, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier about what it actually takes to destroy a tank. Mm-hmm. And it has this actually feeds into wargaming, not just historical grognard and rivet counting stuff, is, okay, what are the objectives for my war game? If you're playing in a tank battle, you have to hold the field. What if I've blown up all the enemy tanks or whatever, but somehow he holds the field? It's in these lulls, these overnight lulls, and you go out and you tow all these tanks off the battlefield, you fix them. Now you can fix the tank. There's a hole in this side, a hole in that side. Sometimes, unfortunately, a bit of a mess inside the tank, if you know what I'm saying. You hose that out, you can patch up the tank, and that tank is running again the next morning if you hold the field. If you don't hold the field, your engineers can't get out there and take those tanks back and have them going the next day. So 2 tank forces, just to use some hypothetical examples, of 100 tanks per side, they meet in combat, they knock out each other to a large extent. Maybe there's 20 tanks left on each side. But if the 20 tanks on one side manages to hold the field against the 20 tanks on the other side, those 20 tanks that are left on the loser side are all that's left the next day. On the winner side, those 20 tanks own the field. Their engineers can go out and get back, out of those original 80 losses, at least half of them. I'm being really conservative here. Now, the next day, I've got 60 tanks against your 20.
Yeah.
There's your momentum. And that stuff happens constantly. This goes into Prokhorovka. This goes Verkopanye. This goes to Duponry up on the northern shoulder of Kursk. It's these pitched battles. It's like, okay, guys, the battle's over. Enough is enough. Stop with the, we've killed enough for one day. No, we have to hold the field. It's not just a grid reference. It's not just a blue line on a map the general drew and says, everyone has to reach that line or nobody gets any friggin' ice cream tonight or whatever. Yeah. It's not something that silly. It's about we have to hold the field because we have to recover these tanks for the next day's battle. So that's definitely the biggest and most common lull that I can think of. Other than that, the battle's intensity would sometimes shift. Like, okay, in the south, we have 48th Panzer Corps on the right, we have 2nd SS Panzer Corps on the left. And I don't want to leave out Army Detachment Kempf. That's the 3rd wing of Kursk that always gets forgotten about. But anyway, these guys attack, and okay, maybe this day the fighting's heavier on this side than on that side. It doesn't really have anything to do with weather, but fuel resources, ammunition resources, where the Soviets thought the next big German breakthrough was going to come. That's where they would piecemeal commit another unit of 1st Tank Army, that's Katakov's 1st Tank Army, into battle, and so the fighting there would get very intense for a brief period. Mm-hmm. But then 3rd Panzer Division is doing well on the left. Okay, we're going to ship some stuff over there. So that's another kind of a lull that you can probably talk about for Kursk.
All right, it's a really interesting one because the whole lulls in the battle decide the battle. You see, if we go to the desert for a minute, El Alamein, how many battles that took to do, because every time one guy stopped, it was because his supply line had got too long. Yeah, and it's like watching a sprinter do 100 meters. So they run 100 meters and they are tired out. If you tell them to suddenly run another 100 meters, it's going to be nearly twice as hard for them to do that distance again. Yeah, they've used up their energy in the first bout, and now they've got nothing left. Yeah. So if a guy runs at you with a really big boxing glove, and says you have to run away from me now, it's not going to go so well. Yeah. That fresh guy is going to punch you down, and you're not going to be able to continue on doing what you're doing. Yeah. You won't be able to stop them in a way. So that's where your lulls happen. Lulls in a battle really are on sort of the granular level. Who can hold what field the longest? Who can recover the most? Like we've been talking about, who can recover the most vehicles or recover the most equipment? Yeah. That's
the reason we wanted to cover this in detail is because this feeds into the victory conditions of a war game, which sometimes feel very gamey. Oh, I've knocked out 82 points of your force. You've knocked out 69 points of my force. I own this town. That was worth 10 victory points or whatever. It's like, oh, it's just a game. At least in a good war game, these victory conditions are based upon real tactical considerations, like we're talking about. It's going to affect what happens between now and the next battle, and that's what's really important.
Yeah, it's a concept I actually hadn't considered before for the actual war itself. You imagine the forces just rolling on through the countryside. Let's say it's the Normandy landings and they're rolling on up through France. You never really consider what's left behind them.
Yeah.
You know, you're always thinking, oh, they're bringing in supplies from America, from England. This is all running forward back to the front.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there was probably full foraging going on as they took new ground. Oh, look, there's a basket of eggs the Germans left behind. I'll use that.
And in Normandy, the French public hated it.
Really?
Absolutely hated it. There was a lot of French civilians in and around the Normandy beach area, like the actual beach area, like farmers and stuff, that hated seeing this start.
Right.
Because, A, the Germans in that sector weren't overly annoying. They did their own things. They seen to their defences and didn't really bother anybody. Yeah. And generally, a lot of the Germans seen the Normandy front, or seen the Normandy beach defences as a holiday.
Yeah.
They were there. They were there to relax. Yeah. So they didn't come in with this superior mentality that a lot of Germans did earlier in the war when they marched into France.
Yeah.
These were just guys that were taking a rest from the Eastern Front.
Right.
And you quite often find, like, when I've been reading through Hans von Luck's book and stuff like that, and some other German memoirs, these soldiers just turned up, and like the French civilians would just sell them eggs and sell them bread and sell them wine, and they were happy with that. Yeah. That status quo there wasn't that bad for the French civilians. Now, it's only when you get into the cities and larger towns that you find the more brutal side of the German occupation really come into the fore.
And when you see one of the worst episodes of the war, at least from a combat unit perspective, is when Normandy was getting ready to hit, or after it had just hit. 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, this is a major unit in Kursk, is deployed in the southern part of France, recuperating and resting. Holy crap, the Allies just landed in Normandy, we need you up here as fast as we can. And they start moving north, and it's when the French resistance gets started. Yeah. It's when the things in France get really, really nasty. There are parts of it that are pretty cool. I mean, Hans von Luck, he gets some criticism because he has a very gentle view on the war in a lot of respects. He wasn't at a lot of really nasty places, believe it or not. And when he was, he just kind of glosses over it. So a big part of the German occupation of France is very kind of, laid back. But when it wasn't, it wasn't. It got nasty very, very quickly. You have SS Panzer companies, doing the classic, round people up in a church, set the church on fire. They almost invented that trope here in France. This stuff happened all through 1944. But at the same time, this is where it's a very commonly kind of laughed at line in Band of Brothers, where they're going into Market Garden and the guy says, there's a tiger behind that building. He says, I can't see it. Put a couple of shells through that building, you'll see it just fine. And everyone kind of laughs when the British tank commander says, my orders are no unnecessary destruction of property. Yeah. Like, this is a war. What are you talking about? That actually kind of happened because there was a lot of backlash for the collateral damage and destruction that was done to France. We did a lot more damage to France than the Germans ever did trying to liberate that place. Liberated the hell out of that place. France was a wasteland after the Allies got through there.
But that's
so it's like, okay, here's the next row of countries. The Netherlands, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. Everyone take it easy this time, okay? Let's not make up a bunch of new enemies here. Yeah. So you actually did have some units that had orders like that.
Yeah, but you never really consider that. You never really hear about that. So it's very interesting to me to actually hear about just what happened after the army has moved through, because you never think about it. It's always the next battle.
You find in France, and when you watch stuff by George Stevens, that whole D-Day to Berlin series, that one big feature-length video that they did with all of George Stevens' color footage, you see him when he's traveling through towns like Saint-Lô and stuff like that, and Saint-Lô is just flattened.
Right.
The 8th Air Force visit that with a 1,000 bomber raid, and they just tear it to the foundations.
Right.
There's nothing.
Well, a lot of that was also done during the battle. We actually did our 70th anniversary tour. We went to every single. We hit like 42 sites in Normandy, and my girlfriend's along for the ride or whatever. She's, hey, I get to go to France on Jim's dime. She's not gonna complain. We're not going to any of the pretty parts. I'm like, we're going to this beach and looking at this old concrete bunker. Aren't we having fun yet? And Jen's like, what's next on our list? A graveyard. Oh, thanks. This is the European vacation I've always dreamed of. But we go to Saint-Lô, and we're driving around Saint-Lô, and we've been to Saint-Miraglisse was a bit of a disappointment, but Saint-Marie du Monde still looks like a movie set. It looks exactly like it did in 1944. It's gorgeous to look at. You see these old buildings, these high steeple churches. We get to Saint-Lô and everything's like, strip malls and Walmarts and barbershops. It's a very modern town. Everything there looks brand new. And my girlfriend actually mentioned this. She said, "Didn't you say there was a big battle here? All these buildings look like they're 30 years old or less." And we finally found the museum, and I pointed the aerial photograph of Saint-Lô. That's why everything here looks brand new.
Yeah, because it is
moonscape.
Yeah,
it's an absolute moonscape.
I mean, if you want,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All right, if you want a modern reference, like a historical reference to go and check out what bombing does, if you're ever in France, go to Pointe du Hoc.
Yep.
Walk around Pointe du Hoc for half an hour, and you'll see what bombing looks like after 60, 70 odd years of it.
Yeah.
And you see this. It is a moonscape.
Yeah. There's still live ammo there.
Yeah, and there's stuff like bits of reinforced concrete that used to be the wall of a bunker, and you know where the bunker was because you can see the rest of it, but this piece is over there, and you're like, that weighs 25
Some of those
tons.
holes are 100 feet across, and I've been there, and at least 30 feet deep. And that's after 70 years of erosion. You can't even imagine what that hole looked like before.
Yeah. So where were we? What were we talking about?
I kind of dragged us off point. Right, I will say, gentlemen, I'm just having a look at the time here. Time is wearing on, so I would say we have time for one last comment or question. So, Jim, either pick a comment or go to the live feed.
Oh, I'm looking at the live stream now. Hey, what's up? Hey, Nev1789 is on the stream. What's going on, man? How you doing? Big Dave, Marcus bring up lots of great points all through the stream. I wish I had time to go through what everybody says here. What tank did the best at Kursk? I would say the T-34. I know we're probably, if not a T-34, let's talk about the Panzer IV. It definitely wasn't the Panther, that's for sure.
No,
no,
that's for damn sure. And the Tiger, it's always tough to mention Tigers. There just wasn't enough of them.
Yeah.
All three of the SS Panzer divisions were at Prokhorovka. We do have Panzer Abteilung Leibstände Adolf Hitler. That was Wittmann's unit. Wittmann is at Prokhorovka. I do have him marked on that map when that part of the article series comes around. There's way too many comments from the articles, guys. Just, go to the article series, see what everyone's comments in there. Even before you read the article itself, check out the comments. There's some really great comments in there that people have been making. It's been really great participation from the community. Some really well thought out, really intelligent stuff. We've even got Dignity in there.
Hello.
Who's like, he's like, hey, I'm noticing that the Kursk line kind of comes down in a bulge, and right above that is a narrower front, is a narrower salient around the town of Orel. I'm like, wow, check it out. General Justin just found the Orel salient. That's great, man.
And it was something we didn't cover in the interview.
Well done.
Yeah, and sure enough, that was a vulnerable point that the Soviets agreed with you. That was the big target for Operation Kutuzov.
Okay.
Was the northern shoulder of the northern shoulder of the Orel salient that leads into Grossdeutschland's subsequent battles in the second part of Kursk around the Karachev railhead, and we get into that in part 5.
Okay. All right. So
you made some good points in your question.
There were a couple of things I did wonder about. I mean, one of the ones was there was that unit that just blitzed off on its own, and in your game, James, you kept close infantry support with it, and it did really well.
Oh yeah.
What the hell was going on there?
We're talking about the elephants.
Yeah. What the hell was going on there? Why were they on their own?
Elephants.
Where was the thought there?
Elephants are a really. They're a fun thing. They're an easy vehicle to make fun of.
I'm not making fun. I'm saying the drivers were dumb.
Yeah, they're an easy vehicle to make fun of.
They did have infantry support, but it was too far back.
Yeah.
And the trick is to keep the infantry support with the tanks or in front of the tanks, and that's harder to do than it sounds.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can't remember if it was Ferdinand or Elephants in particular, or if it was a different type of tank destroyer. But there was a historian talking about it where 2 different regiments were given this particular tank destroyer. I cannot remember which one it is now, if it's a Ferdinand or an Elephant or a Hetzer or something. But the two regiments that were given them, one was an already existing Panzerjäger battalion.
Okay.
The other one was an anti-tank unit that had only used towed anti-tank guns.
Right.
So they had different mentalities. The guys that were Panzerjägers already got into these new vehicles and went, this is great, we are even more effective than we were.
Yeah.
And continued to use the tactics that had worked for them.
Okay.
The ones that used the towed anti-tank guns got these things and thought, oh my god, we are invincible, got in, drove off and blew up. Because they didn't know how to use the technology they had.
Now it makes sense. So again, it's back to that experience.
Yeah. When you this is entirely the whole... The experienced guys do better because they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
The inexperienced guys, because these guys were only towed anti-tank gunners.
Yeah, this feels like you and me playing World of Tanks.
Yeah, they didn't realise that when they got into this machine, it didn't make them invincible. It actually made them a bigger target.
Yeah.
They were used to hiding.
That's what makes it difficult on a gaming table, and this is what I was trying to bring up in the article thread, was... It's one thing to say those tanks should have had infantry support. Okay, I'm going to set up a 50mm table and we're going to game this out. And now you're going to show me how you would do it. It's actually pretty hard.
Yeah.
It's definitely possible. And when it works, man, it works.
Yeah.
And it worked on my table, I think, because the Soviets, the player wasn't getting very good rolls in his artillery, where he didn't see what was happening until it was a little too late. But it's tough because that infantry has to be out in front of the tank.
Yeah.
And or in this case, the tank destroyer. And you need to have also my table might not have been entirely historically accurate because I had a little bit too much terrain on there. I.e., the German supporting infantry has more cover to leverage, so it can get close. It has to get out in front of those tanks and then not take a turn.
Yeah.
It has to stand there and take it for a turn, because what it's going to do is it's going to take a reaction order in battle group, let's say. And now if the Soviet infantry tried to cat attack or close assault attack the close assault, the Ferdinands, which was the big weakness of those tanks, they forgot to put a machine gun in them, of all things.
Is it forgot or just design changes?
It as far as I'm concerned, the Elephant was designed to be... Well, look at other Panzerjägers that were built.
Yeah.
So you had the Panzerjäger 1, no machine guns.
Yeah.
You had the early model Stugs.
Yeah.
They had one machine gun on them, but that was only on the top.
Yeah.
You had the Hetzers, one machine gun on the top.
Yeah.
It wasn't a really big design philosophy to put close range support weapons onto a tank destroyer.
Okay.
Because that wasn't its role. It wasn't supposed to be close enough to have infantry running at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. People like John was saying, he's absolutely right. The Ferdinand Elephant is an easy vehicle to make fun of. It's big, it's fat, it's slow, it's ugly. And people like to, they forgot to put a machine gun on them. How silly for you. Well, that was part of it, but a much bigger part of it was you're using a tank destroyer as a spearhead attack unit. Okay, that's just flat out wrong.
Yeah.
Tank destroyers are defensive weapons, and your infantry support, you're not using good combined arms doctrine. If you had used Panzerjäger Abteilung 654 and 653 were the two units in question. If you had used them as defensive weapons instead of offensive weapons, and if you had used them properly in a combined arms doctrine, whether or not you had a machine gun on the roof wouldn't have mattered. You would have killed everything long before it came with the machine gun range. It's those tactics and doctrine, and that stuff's tougher to do. A good war game will make it tough to do, and it kind of teaches you why it's tough. You've almost done it now yourself vicariously, and that's what makes a really good war game, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, Jim, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you to John as well. Thank you to everybody at home for joining along as well. It has been absolutely fabulous. I have loved this. I hope everyone out there has loved this.
The chat has been great.
Yeah, the chat has some really
there's
good
a lot of
comments
people in here.
There's been a lot of sarky little comments that I haven't wanted to talk about. Mainly Manda. She has a great sense of humor.
That's okay. That's great.
All right, well, everybody, we are going to shut it down for the night. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. We may do it again sometime, gentlemen, if you're up for it.
Certainly would, yeah.
Absolutely.
And if you guys want to watch it as well. I think for now, we will say good night, everybody, and we will hopefully see you again very soon.
Awesome. That was great.